Hello there. Welcome to a first time lapse with a voiceover. In this one, I will be drawing Melissa Kinrenka, who's a VTuber that covers a lot of songs that I enjoy. So, yeah, it's basically just a breakdown of my process that I will be narrating. As you can see, this, although it will eventually be pixel art, this is started in Clip Studio Paint, which is a digital art program where I usually sketch before I copy paste it into a sprite and draw over it, which you can see here. When I go into a sprite, usually the first thing I do, especially if I'm working with outlines, is I will add a sketch on top of the existing sketch, just so I can have something to work with in a sprite. Once that's done, I will add in the rough colors. As you can see here, I start with the face. I'm now working on the hair color. Now, this character has a rather interesting gradient in their hair. It goes from white to green to orange, which is why you see me put down these colors. There's also a touch of like light blue in there, some purple as well, just to add a bit more visual interest. What I'm doing now is I'm adding in a guide to help me with the shading. Since this is a rather complex color palette, I don't want to spend too much time picking colors before I put in the shading. So I use this as like a little guide to help me like see where the shadow is roughly going to be. I then pick the colors for the hair. Yeah, pretty straightforward, just standard color picking. It's something that you just need to get used to. Once that's done, I start refining the face. Now, this is just a personal workflow thing, but whenever I do portraits, I like to start with the facial features first, and then add the hair and everything else. In this case, I start with the eyes. I want to get like the detail in there. The eyes are usually a focal point of, at least in my opinion, the portraits that I make. So that's where I usually spend the attention in first. I want to get the shape and size of the pupil and the iris right. I then move on to the face, the rest of the face, and you'll see me have like varying line widths, as well as adding like a red to the outline. This is both to bring some more visual interest into the outlines, as well as emulating line weight, which is basically something from regular painting, where the outline gets thinner the faster your stroke is. You don't usually see that in pixel art, but I'm trying to bring it over here. So at this point, I'm just finishing up the eye. I'm adding some eyeshadow, as you can see. Putting in some more shading in the like the eyelids, beneath the brows. So at this point, I'm happy with. I'm mostly happy with how the face looks. I just adding a little bit of shading onto the face here, where I'm trying some things out, but eventually I'll settle with the shape you see on the screen right now. And from there on, I move on to the hair. Now, the hair in this example is pretty complicated, all things considered. There's a lot of things going on. Mostly this is due to the gradient. So the majority of this time lapse is actually just me rendering out the hair. Now, unfortunately, I lost a portion of the time lapse due to my PC crashing. So you'll see a sudden jump cut in a couple of seconds where the left side of the hair is basically almost finished. But before I start on the coloring, I am going to clean up all the line work. But yeah, basically it's just cleaning up all the lines, making sure that they look nice and tidy. Before I move on to the colors, just so I have a bit clearer of an idea. You can see again that I'm trying to emulate line weight here. I think I kind of lost sight of like the process at some point. I still need a lot of like trial and error with this kind of outlining, and it's something to note for future projects. But in the end, I was quite satisfied with how the lines looked. Yeah, so that's where I just lost a bunch of footage. But yeah, basically at this point, it's just getting the gradient right, and both in colors as well as shape. When you work with hair, how you lay out your clusters is very important, because a lot of people try to shade every strand of hair individually, especially on a scale like this. But a better way to approach this is to just have large clusters that sort of resemble like locks of hair, and have those like suggest that the hair is has a certain sort of texture. In this case, it's like strands going down, which is why you see a lot of tapered edges whenever there's like two colors bordering each other. Just to sell that feel that it's hair. Beyond that, it's pretty straightforward coloring stuff. It's just having two colors, picking an intermediate color if necessary, shifting the darker tones towards blue, shifting the lighter tones towards yellow. Like I said before, the blue highlights are there mostly just for like a little bit of visual spice, almost. It's just to add like just add a subtle point of interest to the hair, even though there's already a lot going on in hair. But yeah, it's just something that once you have like a basic grasp of color, you can start experimenting with and see what works and what doesn't work, because at that point you will have gained enough knowledge to determine if something works or doesn't. A lot of this drawing is essentially just a giant experiment. It's basically a combination of a lot of things I've been working on the past 2 months regarding outlines, color use, line weights, all that stuff. Another thing you can see is that I'm giving a lot of color to the outlines. There's like 4 or 5 colors that I used throughout the entire drawing. In the outlines themselves, there's a brown, a green, a blue, a purple, and then the main color that's black. I will put these down basically in the same fashion that I've put all the other colors down. It's red, brown, and green towards areas that are catching light, and then purple for areas that don't, and then blue for areas that get bounce light from the surroundings. It's also a nice way to break up some of the like clumps where two different hair strands come together. It doesn't noticeably break up the outline, but it does hint that there's something going on beyond it just being a blob of black. So I've finished the main portion of the hair at this point, so I'm moving on to the body, which essentially is just basically the same way I colored the face, except that this time there's a larger range of shadow and highlight tones. So you see me use like the darker purple tones like underneath the chin, because that's where not a lot of color would be. And then it moves down. Now there's one thing to note here. It's the relatively saturated red line that's on the shoulder as well as the neck. This is a light that basically just emulates the terminus, which isn't actually something you'd see, but it basically just amplifies the contrast between the darker and the lighter areas, which you'd have when there's like a very strong cast shadow, basically. You can also see a more greenish hue, which I use for areas that are facing towards the backside of the drawing. It's essentially just the ambient bounce slide. Realistically, it would be a bit more blue, but I just really like this hue. It kind of breaks away from the whole color ramp on the skin, but not in a way that's too noticeable. Again, this is something that just comes with experience and lots of looking at how other people do it. It's a very stylized way of doing this. So you do have to understand you do have to somewhat understand what you're doing. So next up is his jacket, which essentially this part is just the same as the hair, with the obvious difference being that the jacket is smooth, so you won't be seeing as much texture using those clusters I mentioned before. Mostly the shadows are just larger blobs and there's less color variation going on, because I didn't want to have too much going on in there since it's not the main focus of this drawing. From here on out, it's basically just the same process. So I will cut off the commentary here and you can just watch the time lapse without me constantly bothering you. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will do more of this in the future, probably.